Yeah.
God, normally I wouldn't do this, but I'm in an anime phase of my life right now. Do you know what anime is?
Vaguely.
It's Japanese cartoon, essentially. Don't crucify me, just for the sake of explaining it. And obviously, it derives from manga, which is Japanese comics. So I've been watching Cowboy Bebop. It's a space opera kind of. It's like a villain of the week, but this guy Spike is a bounty hunter, and all of the tracks are deep cut jazz. Like it's
Oh,
nasty. It's just Dan is a saxophone player. I'm like, as you probably know by now, I'm like on a deep anime journey right now, and I just feel an obligation to play tank.
yeah, hot damn, they play great. Yeah, that's a killer alto player. I don't know who that is, but that's a very high level, at least bebop style player. I mean, just a really great alto saxophone solo and good ideas, good range. Came up with really good lines, and that's a good bebop sound too. So
What is the
that's
bebop? What is bebop?
So bebop is essentially it's an early jazz form, at least relatively speaking, and it's very ornamented. It makes use of the bebop scales, which are essentially the scales that you and I know with usually chromatic additions to them. So you can make a bebop scale by adding a chromatic passing tone between a number of chord
Oh,
tones.
it's like
So
blues. Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, and the delivery of it, the early bebop, granddaddy is Charlie Parker, and so
Ah,
that's the Bird style of playing. And then, there's as people can Google, there's like, post bop, hard bop, all this stuff. But, that very ornamented, active, chromatic passing tone, sort of fast, ornamented is the right word, way of playing around the tune. So Bird was known as Charlie Parker's nickname was Bird, was always known for his phenomenal technique and his time as well. So he could play a gazillion notes. They all sounded like they're in exactly the right spot, and it had this real great melodic shape to it, even though you were hearing this, flurry of notes. And as this soloist did very well, this tune had some, at least what I would call like hard bop influence to it, with all the hits, not just in the saxophone, but in the brass and the percussion as well. But also in the percussion, you heard a little bit of a Latin sort of groove going
mm-hmm,
on there. So
mm-hmm.
it was a nice like fusion of all those styles into a very active, high level big band chart. He was having the brass do all sorts of stuff. That was, I think, a full 5-person saxophone section. Definitely heard some tenors, and I heard a Barry, down there in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
basement a couple of times. So yeah, that was a full on big band score right there.
I used to really look down on anime and not really take it seriously. But then as I sort of, started, I read this anime called Attack on Titan, read this manga Attack on Titan, and the story was so like moving and like deeply emotional and very human and psychological, and all of a sudden I sort of had this awakening to it, and I didn't realize how much music, and I'm on my own personal journey with this particular genre of music, because there's just so much openings, ending themes, the music within the episodes. It's crazy. And this is literally like an opening piece, like a 3-minute thing that opens the show every time it airs, right? Or aired. And the soundtrack is so diverse and so jazz heavy, and like this bebop style now that I know that word exists. And I listen to it all the time. And it's actually opened up. It's interesting how like things, when you're ready for them, things come to you. Like if as long as you're open minded, right? Like I
Yeah.
never ever cared about Pat Metheny or jazz or like fusion stuff like this. And now I'm like, holy fuck! Like there's a whole world that I just didn't even know about. And I find myself like, now you're talking about Charlie Parker. I'm like, you bet your ass I'm gonna check out the Charlie Parker and violin thing, because like probably 6 months ago I would have been like, oh, that's cool, because Charlie Parker. But now that I have like the sense, like the auditory like awakening of it, it's crazy. It's crazy how you can really shift your brain to exploring new things when you're ready for them.
And so exactly, I think that's also, taking it outside of the context you just gave it. I mean, that would be a great high level big band chart to just have on a jazz band concert, even not as a part of, any particular story, because it was just so well written. And we kind of, I think we touched on that last time where, usually the best music of any type pretty much works outside of its context and really well for its context, and that would be a big band chart that, the musicians would love to play. It gave them a lot to do, but it wasn't needlessly complicated. And, like I said, it had that hard bop style to it. So, the saxophonists, that I equate with the hard bop style. If people want to check out, like Cannonball Adderley is one. We talked about Charlie Parker as being like the granddaddy of bebop saxophone, but also, some Coltrane is also in the hard bop style. So the thing about jazz is that it came about so recently, and pretty much a lot of the great soloists and the great musicians became like a genre unto themselves. So there was it was changing depending on location, because what they did in Detroit was not the same as New York. It's not the same as New Orleans, and Kansas City and all this stuff. So it's the fun of it, but also it's difficult to exactly pin down like it's this genre, darn it, except, nowadays we're like 70 years after like the 50s of hard bop. And so people have kind of, coalesced around who the hard bop style players are. But yeah, that's a good bebop hard bop style, big band chart with lots of Latin influence and really killer alto player. I'm not sure who that was, but that's got to be someone of some repute. That's a very strong solo.